Before entering the abandoned Harmony Borax Works mine in Death Valley, Ranger Mike Edwards froze, his heart racing. A half-buried metal box with a broken lock gleamed in the sand at his feet. Nearby, 3 pairs of fresh footprints trailed off into the darkness of the tunnel. Neither tourists nor regular trespassers ever wandered here, especially at the height of the August heat wave, when the thermometer read plus 51 degrees C in the shade. "What I saw at the mine changes everything," he hastily wrote in his personal diary a few hours later. In the official report of the 7th of September 2022, only a dry line appeared. Signs of unauthorized entry at the historic site were detected. He made no mention of the strange sounds coming from the depths of the tunnels or the contents of the box. Mike Edwards, a 41-year-old geologist by training, never planned to be on duty in North America's hottest place. Decades of experience working in Yosemite and Grand Canyon national parks didn't prepare him for the extreme conditions of Death Valley. But after a painful divorce, with his 12-year-old daughter staying with her mother in San Francisco, Mike was looking for a place where the loneliness would be justified by the distance. A remote ranger station in the Badwater area, with salt flats 86 meters below sea level and sparse signs of life, was ideal. The nearest village was a 2-hour drive away. Mobile communications were intermittent, and summer tourists could be counted on one's fingers. A month before the strange incident at the mine, on the 5th of August 2022, a flash flood caused by a downpour rare to these parts had swept through Death Valley, washing away roads and exposing what had been hidden for decades beneath layers of sand. It was then, while checking the damage near Devil's Hole Cave, that Mike found a water-washed old journal that started a chain of events that gave even the seasoned ranger goosebumps. The first rays of the sun had just touched the Ash Meadows cliffs, but the temperature was already approaching plus 35 degrees C. Ranger Mike Edwards arrived in an off-road patrol vehicle at Devil's Hole, a water cave in the area adjacent to Death Valley. His job is to assess the damage from the recent flooding. 4 days ago, a rare downpour hit the desert, spewing out 3 months' worth of rainfall in a matter of hours. Torrents of water washed out roads and damaged the highway between Furnace Creek and Badwater. At Devil's Hole, a reservoir more than 13 meters deep with a strictly protected population of endemic fish, part of a protective fence, collapsed. Climbing down the slope to assess the damage, Mike noticed something shiny in the crevice. A metal spiral, part of a binder embedded in the ground. Flooding had eroded the layer of sand, exposing an object that had been there for years. The ranger carefully pulled out a tattered magazine with a faded blue cover. The inscription on the front read, P. Regan's 1984 to 1985, Expedition USGS. The Geological Survey often conducted research in Death Valley, but what was this journal doing here, dozens of miles from their usual routes? The pages had yellowed, but the text was still legible, standard geological records. However, a section from March 1985 made Mike frown. 3rd day of anomaly observations in the Harmony Borax Works area. Vibrations are increasing in the east adit. Instruments are picking up deviations. Johnson thinks it's a tectonic process, but the nature of the vibrations is atypical of microseismic phenomena. The frequency range is too narrow, almost like an artificial source. Next, several sheets were neatly torn out. The subsequent entries did not concern Harmony Borax Works. The protocol was to turn the find over to the park office immediately, but the geologist's professional curiosity got the better of him. Mike decided to check out said adit himself first. Having completed the inspection, the ranger was loading the equipment into the car when he noticed an older man approaching. The thermometer in the car was already reading plus 42 degrees C. The man introduced himself as Jack Williams from Payramp. The conversation turned from questions about restoring telephone service to the strangeness of the aftermath of the flood. Jack was reluctant to talk about the underground sounds heard at night, as if something was moving deep beneath the surface. The local Indians, he explained, believed that heavy rains in the desert awakened sleeping spirits. Similar phenomena had been observed about 30 years ago, also after a rare downpour. At that time, Government geologists came to take measurements at the abandoned Harmony Borax Works mines. After they left, the strange sounds stopped. Mike noted the time coincidence with the dates of the Huygens expedition. Jack didn't remember much except the government vehicles and equipment near the East Adit, the same one mentioned in the journal. Thankful for the information, the ranger continued his patrol. In the standard report, Mike had detailed the damage at Devil's Hole, but hadn't mentioned a word about the log. Something told him it wasn't just any old document. 37 years ago, a group of geologists had recorded strange vibrations in the mine. After they left, the phenomenon had stopped. Now, after a similar flood, the locals are hearing the underground sounds again. And why were important pages torn out of the journal? The park archives did not mention any anomalies in the Harmony Borax Works area. The official USGS expedition report from 1984 to 1985 contained only standard observations, no vibrations or unusual phenomena. It was as if the pages from the found journal belonged to a secret part of the research. That evening, while studying maps of the area, Mike heard a radio crackle. The dispatcher was reporting suspicious activity in the western part of Panamint Valley, unusual lights and the sound of running machinery in an uninhabited area. The nearest patrol was instructed to check out the information. Checking the map, Mike saw that he was closest to the possible disturbance, 40 miles away. Taking the call, he planned a dawn departure. Remarkably, the area of the incident was located near the abandoned Harmony Borax Works mines. Another coincidence? As these coincidences accumulated, Mike became more and more convinced that there was more involved than just an old journal and local legends. He carefully packed the find in a waterproof container and put it in his gear for tomorrow's patrol. Perhaps in the eastern Adit he would finally find the answers to his multiplying questions. Dawn was just beginning to blur the darkness when Mike Edwards' patrol SUV crossed the western boundary of the Panamint Valley. The ranger drove into Temanotu to get there before the heat of the day set in. The thermometer was already reading plus 32 degrees C. Panamint Valley is an arid depression about 100 kilometers long between the ridge of the same name and the Argus Mountains. After recent flooding, temporary pools of muddy water have formed at the bottom. According to the dispatcher's report, a local rancher noticed suspicious lights and the sound of machinery near the abandoned desert oasis campground yesterday. Mike got to the point an hour later. The signs of flooding were obvious. Washed-out road, rock deposits, new scour holes. Leaving the car behind a rock ledge, the ranger continued on foot. The abandoned campsite was a few ruined huts with a faded sign held on by a single fixture. The place had been empty for at least 10 years. The door of one of the huts had been broken into recently. The inside was chaotic. Overturned furniture, scattered belongings, broken glass. It looked like someone had been methodically searching for something. Under the mattress, Mike found an old Pentax K1000 film camera with film inserted. The frame counter showed 24, 2/3 of the film. Given the condition of the hut, the camera had clearly been left recently, and then returned to look for it, but not found. Fresh tire tracks of heavy off-road vehicles were visible on the sandy ground behind the campsite. They led to the eastern end of the valley, gradually losing themselves in the rocky ground. In that direction were the spurs of the Panamint Mountains and the old Wild Rose Canyon, a place where mining had once taken place. On the road to the canyon, the ranger spotted a beat-up pickup truck approaching. A gaunt man in his 60s stepped out of the vehicle. The old man introduced himself as Harold Miller of Balrath Township. He said there had been unusual traffic in the valley since the floods, with several pickup trucks and SUVs making their way to the abandoned mines, usually at night. Noticing the camera, Harold told of a recent tourist, an amateur photographer who was keen on taking pictures of old mines. The young man asked about Harmony Borax Works in the East Adit. After a couple of days, he left excited, saying he had noticed something unusual near the adit. He was never seen again. Mike asked about desert spirits. Harold confirmed that there had been a story in Balrath for a long time, that after rare rains, something wakes up in the mines. The sound of blows, vibrations, a faint glow in the depths, and the recent flooding had been the worst in 40 years. Thanking the old man, the ranger continued on to Wild Rose Canyon. The climb was steep and the thermometer read plus 47 degrees C in the shade. At the entrance to the canyon there were fresh tracks of vehicles and sand-covered scraps of paper, fragments of old geological maps with handwritten notes, mineral names, percentages, directions. In the corner of one, Mike could see the inscription, Rangers, 1985. Rangers? The same geologist from the journal they'd found? The ranger gathered the scraps into a plastic bag. This could no longer be a mere coincidence. Due to the unbearable heat and limited water supplies, Mike soon turned back. In his report to dispatch, he mentioned only the campground break-in and vehicle tracks, omitting the camera and maps. At the station, the ranger retrieved the film from a camera in an improvised dark room and sent it to a Las Vegas photo lab, then studied the scraps of maps. As he compared the fragments, he realized that they showed not only Wild Rose Canyon, but also the Harmony Borax Works area. The map marked in detail the east adit from Regan's log, and next to it strange symbols that looked like a seismogram. In the evening, the developed photographs were delivered. Most were of the usual Death Valley views, but a few caught Mike's eye. They depicted the entrance to a mine in the Harmony Borax Works area. The strange thing was that in two of the pictures, blurred human figures were guessed in the darkness of the entrance, and the last shot, clearly taken in a hurry, showed a metal box at the entrance, similar to one Mike had spotted on a recent patrol. The images were taken the day before the flooding. It looked like the missing photographer had accidentally filmed something he shouldn't have seen. Now someone was looking for him. After tying the finds together, a journal with a vibration record, maps marked 1985, photos of figures near the mine, Mike decided to check out the Harmony Borax Works East adit in person. Perhaps that's where the key to these oddities lies. The stars were still shining brightly over Death Valley when Mike Edwards drove out of the ranger station. To reach the Harmony Borax Works Historic District before the main heat wave arrived, it was necessary to leave before dawn. The thermometer read plus 29 degrees C, the coolest temperature of the day at the height of August. The first rays of sunlight colored the eastern ridge as the ranger arrived at his destination. Harmony Borax Works is a historic site where borax was mined in the 1880s to make soap and glass. The long-abandoned mines and dilapidated buildings were protected by the National Park Service as a cultural heritage site. Mike left the car at the tourist observation deck, now empty, and followed the trail leading to the abandoned mines. The complex consisted of several tunnels cut into the rocky slope. The main entrances had long ago been blocked off with bars for the safety of visitors, but the eastern adit mentioned in Regan's journal was off the tourist route. The ranger checked the fragments of maps he had collected. According to them, the eastern adit was located about half a mile from the main complex, behind a low ridge of rock. It was not marked on the tourist maps, probably because it was in a state of disrepair or insignificant for a historical exposition. As Mike rounded the ridge, he saw an inconspicuous entrance in the hillside. The place looked abandoned, but the ground around it was crumbled, and the rocks showed fresh scratches, the marks of a recent visit. The ranger switched on a powerful torch and scrutinized the entrance. The metal grating that had once covered the adit had been neatly cut and set aside. Someone had recently secured access inside. The clear footprints of several people were visible on the ground near the entrance. Nearby on the stone, Mike noticed a worn mark. Something had been standing or lying in that spot, perhaps the same metal box that was visible in the photograph. Going deeper into the adit without support and special equipment would be a breach of safety protocol, especially given the possible presence of unknown persons. Mike decided to check out the area around him first. A few meters from the entrance, he noticed a strange depression in the ground, relatively fresh judging by the crumbling edges. Water from a recent flood had eroded the ground, and something had come to the surface. Carefully raking the loose earth, the ranger found the corner of a metal object. A few more minutes of work with his hands, and he found a rusty metal box half burrowed into the ground in front of him. It looked like it had been there for decades, until the flood had washed away the soil above it. The box was heavy, about 60 by 40 centimeters, with a corroded lock. Mike carefully freed it from its earthy captivity and examined it. The lock was badly corroded, and the ranger managed to open the lid with a utility knife. Inside were stacks of yellowed documents and several sealed metal containers. The documents turned out to be old geological reports dated 1983 to 1985. On top of the papers was a worn folder labeled "For Internal Use Only, Harmony Project." The colored USGS logo on the folder had long since faded, but was still legible. Flipping through the documents, Mike found that they contained detailed analyses of the mineral composition of rocks from the eastern Adit, strange seismograph readings, and reports of atypical geological anomalies. The texts often mentioned high concentrations of gold and rare earth elements, as well as recommendations to contain information to avoid uncontrolled mining. Now everything was beginning to come together in a coherent picture. In the 1980s, a geological expedition discovered rich gold veins in the eastern Adit. But instead of making the information public, it was decided to hide the find, perhaps because of its location in a national park where mining is prohibited. Vibrations and anomalies mentioned in Reigen's journal were probably related to geological features of the gold-bearing layer. Nearly 40 years later, someone may have stumbled across this information and organized illegal gold mining under the guise of rare visits to the abandoned mine. And regular earthquakes and microseismic activity characteristic of the region created conditions for local legends about desert spirits. Suddenly, Mike heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. Taking cover behind a rock ledge, he saw an unmarked black SUV pull up to the eastern Adit. 3 men in plain civilian clothes got out of the vehicle and began unloading some equipment. The ranger took a few pictures on his service phone, trying to capture the faces and license plate number. Then, without attracting attention, he retreated deeper into cover and contacted dispatch. After briefly outlining the situation, he requested support to document illegal activity within the park. Mike continued his surveillance until reinforcements arrived, recording the group's movements. The men were clearly well organized. They quickly set up portable equipment that looked like compact mining rigs and disappeared into the Adit. One remained outside on guard. 40 minutes later, a support team arrived, 2 rangers from a neighboring station and an Inyo County police officer. After a brief exchange of information, they organized an apprehension. The operation went off without complications. The non-professional gold miners did not expect to meet with law enforcement and offered no resistance. During the search of the SUV, they found specialized equipment for mining and primary processing of gold, as well as several containers with already mined metal. According to preliminary estimates, the value of the seized gold was more than $100,000. During the interrogation, it turned out that the group was not acting independently. One of the detainees, a former employee of the Geological Service, came across a reference to Project Harmony in archival documents. After conducting his own investigation, he organized a small group for illegal mining. He also found a customer, a Las Vegas businessman who financed the operation in exchange for a share of the extracted gold. Thanks to Mike's discovery of documents from a rusty box, investigators were able to establish the full picture of the criminal activity, as well as the involvement of several other individuals. A joint operation by the National Park Service and the FBI a week later led to the arrest of the rest of the group and the seizure of significant amounts of illegally mined gold. As for the desert spirits and strange sounds, there was a rational explanation for them. It turned out that the special geological structure of the eastern Adit created an acoustic effect. Under certain atmospheric conditions, especially after rains, water seeping through microcracks caused vibrations and resonance, which was spread throughout the desert valley. These sounds, coupled with rumors of rich gold deposits, gave rise to local legend. Ranger Mike Edwards received a commendation from the National Park Service for his professionalism in detecting and documenting illegal activity. Exactly 1 month had passed since the illegal gold mining was uncovered. The weather in Death Valley was still hot, but it was no longer exhausting. Mike Edwards was going through the paperwork in his desk, preparing for the planned staff turnover. In a week's time, he had a well-deserved holiday waiting for him. For the first time in 3 years, he planned to spend time with his daughter in San Francisco. The story of the illegal gold diggers was slowly losing its resonance. The National Park Service welded up the entrance to the east Adit with a sturdy grate and alarm system. Detainees received serious jail sentences. The Harmony Project report was reclassified and transferred to a centralized archive. Among the papers, Mike found Regan's journal, the one he'd kept after the investigation was over. Flipping through the faded pages, the ranger noticed something he'd missed before, a tiny notation in the margin of one of the last pages. Check with Alan. Alan Dawson was the senior ranger of the northern sector, Mike's colleague and occasional replacement. A ranger who had been surprisingly quick at the mine the day the illegal gold diggers were apprehended. Someone who knew all the trails and abandoned adits of Death Valley like no one else. Comparing dates and facts, Mike realized that Dawson had started his service in Death Valley in 1985, just after the Regan's expedition had ended. Coincidence? Perhaps. But what if someone from the Geological Survey had been assigned to be a silent observer of the gold vein? Mike opened his laptop and entered a query into the personnel database. The system came up with basic information on Dawson, ranger with an impeccable reputation, geology graduate, former USGS employee before transferring to the Park Service. Suddenly, Mike felt someone's eyes on him. Alan Dawson stood at the entrance to the office, watching his colleague with an impenetrable expression. Friends, you've just heard the story of the Death Valley Ranger, about a man who sought silence after personal drama, but discovered a secret hidden beneath layers of sand and time. What is really going on in the abandoned mines of Harmony Borax Works? Is Mike's colleague really involved in hiding a gold mine, and how many more such secrets do our national parks hold? After all, if one geological expedition nearly 40 years ago was able to conceal a rich deposit, what else could be hiding from public view in areas that are considered national treasures? Write your opinion in the comments.